Lucas Hart's fingers had just touched the door handle when the cold bite of metal ran up through his fingertips. He did not hesitate. He pushed. The door slid open without a sound. The conference room was so quiet it felt as if every last breath had been sucked out of it. Even breathing seemed unnecessary. Beyond the enormous floor-to-ceiling windows, the whole city was still soaked in cold morning light. The glass curtain walls reflected a gray-white sheen, like slabs of frozen frost. On both sides of the long table, 7 board members were already seated in perfect order. Their suits were crisp, their ties flawless, and even their posture carried a weight that allowed no argument. No one spoke. No one looked at him. Only his seat was empty. The first chair to the CEO's left, closest to Vivian Grant, and therefore the most glaring. Vivian sat at the head of the table, her spine straight. Her charcoal gray suit outlined a figure that was sharp, capable, and distant. Her long hair was twisted into a low bun. Not a single strand had escaped, as if even her emotions had been tucked away with it. She was looking down, flipping through documents. Her lashes lowered like 2 small closed fans, hiding every emotion she might have leaked. When Lucas pulled out his chair and sat down, the chill of the solid wood table crawled through the cuff of his shirt and all the way up his forearm. That cold did not come from the weather. It came from people. Everyone is here. Vivian closed the folder. Her voice was not loud, but it was like a ruler, measuring the entire space with exact, merciless precision. She did not look at anyone. She only stared at a spot on the table, as if reading a verdict that had been written long ago. The air vent gave off a faint hum, like the only living organ in the room. Lucas turned slightly, his gaze landing on her face. They had been married for 3 years. He had seen her in too many forms. The sleepy confusion when she rubbed her eyes in bed, the polished calm when she raised a glass at banquets, the stubborn seriousness when she bit the end of a pen in the study at midnight while revising plans. But the woman in front of him now was a complete stranger. Her eyes were like blades tempered in fire, sharp, cold, and without the slightest hesitation. She was so stingy with him that she would not even spare him the corner of her eye. Due to the company's strategic restructuring needs, she began, her pace even, every word clear, like she was reading a notice that had nothing to do with her. The board proposes to remove Mr. Lucas Hart from his positions as board director and executive vice president of Grant Group. Effective immediately. The second her voice fell, Lucas heard his own heartbeat sink hard, like a stone dropping into a deep well without even an echo. His first reaction was, had he heard wrong? His second reaction was to instinctively look around at the other directors. The CFO was slowly turning a pen in his fingers, the tip making a barely audible scratch against the table. 2 independent directors kept their eyes fixed straight ahead on the projection screen, as if it were showing some life-or-death classified information. Only Director Thompson, sitting at the far end, looked up quickly when Lucas's gaze swept past him. His eyes were complicated, like a spilled palate. Regret, sympathy, and a deeply hidden certainty. Reason, Lucas said. His voice was steadier than even he had expected. Strategic restructuring. Vivian repeated the words and finally raised her eyes to look at him. Her makeup was flawless. Her lipstick was a restrained rose mauve, her mascara separated every lash cleanly, and even the faint amber ring at the edge of her pupils was just right. But her eyes were empty, like a field after snow, where even the wind refused to linger for another second. This is a collective decision by the board, she said. Lucas stared at the tight line of her jaw. It looked like a shard of ice that refused to melt. I need a specific reason. The Smart Security Division under my responsibility has increased revenue by 240% over the past 3 years, and its profit margin has ranked first in the industry for 2 consecutive quarters. Mr. Hart. She interrupted him. Her tone was light, but it landed like a heavy hammer wrapped in cotton. That title was like a rusty nail driven hard into the last bit of dignity between them. The resolution has passed. She paused, then lightly tapped the table with one finger. The rhythm was precise, like a countdown. What you need to do now is cooperate with the handover. The conference room went completely mute. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to have been choked. Lucas slowly leaned back. His spine pressed against the leather chair, and the chill deepened. Morning light slashed in from the side, drawing a clear line between light and shadow across him and Vivian. Light on his side. Shadow on hers. He watched the slight tightening of her jaw as she announced the resolution. He watched her hand gripping the edge of the document until her knuckles turned white. He watched the strip of wrist exposed beneath her cuff, where blue veins pulsed faintly under thin skin. And he saw the almost imperceptible tremor in her fingertips. "Is this your final decision?" he asked. Vivian's gaze shifted away and landed on the corner of the document spread across the table. Her voice was as soft as a sigh. "This is the board's decision." "Fine." Lucas stood. The legs of the chair scraped against the marble floor, making a short, dry sound. He did not look at anyone again. He turned and walked toward the door. Just as his hand touched the handle, her voice came from behind him, calm as if she were announcing a filter change in the break room. "Your office must be cleared out before the end of the day. Administration will assist you." He did not turn around. The moment the door closed behind him, he heard someone lower their voice and say something. Then came Vivian's voice, hard as iron. "Continue to the next agenda item." 2:00 in the afternoon. The executive vice president's office. The blinds were half lowered, slicing the sunlight into narrow gold strips that fell diagonally over the half-packed cardboard box, as if painting a false warmth over a farewell. Lucas stood in front of his desk, his gaze resting on the framed photo. It had been taken on their wedding day. Vivian wore a trailing white gown, smiling until her eyes curved like crescents. His hand rested around her waist, his fingers tightening slightly, as if afraid she might run away. Looking at it now, that smile was too bright. So bright it looked almost fake. He reached out and picked up the frame. The glass reflected his face at that moment. Calm. Too calm. Even he froze for a second. How could he not squeeze out even a trace of anger? So this was what it meant when the heart died completely. Even struggling felt like a waste of energy. His phone vibrated. A system notification from finance popped up automatically. "The special performance approval process you are following has been completed. Recipient, Mason Cole. Amount, $1. 25 million. Note, special project contribution bonus." Lucas stared at the screen. His fingers unconsciously rubbed the edge of the glass frame. $1.25 million. Suddenly, he remembered last Wednesday night, when she pushed open the door at home, and a faint trace of woody cologne clung to her collar. It was not his usual cedar. Nor was it her white tea perfume. He remembered the WhatsApp profile picture that flashed across her phone screen. Before he could see it clearly, her thumb swiped it away, fast as if destroying evidence. He remembered how, over the past 3 months, she had been coming home later and later. Client dinners had become more frequent. Emergency meetings had become routine. So he had not been paranoid. She had already paved her escape route thicker than a red carpet. Lucas suddenly laughed. It was very soft, like air leaking out in a sigh, and it sounded especially desolate in the empty office. 3 years of marriage. Over 1,000 days and nights. He had thought there had at least been some sincerity. Even if it was a business marriage, they had at least fought side by side, taking the company from her father's hands. A company nearly shorted to death by capital. And dragging it into the top 3 in the industry. So in her heart, he had not even counted as a backup option. Fine. He put down the phone. His movements suddenly became exceptionally decisive. The photo frame was thrown casually into the bottom of the cardboard box. It landed with a dull thud, like a heart finally hitting the ground. He walked to the bookshelf and pulled out several heavy technical manuals. Smart Security System Architecture Design. Edge Computing Security Protocols Explained. AI Behavior Recognition Model Optimization Guide. He opened the hidden layer inside the spines. 3 documents sealed in anti-static bags lay there quietly, their corners flat, the seals tight, like 3 miniature bombs waiting to explode. The first, Core Architecture and Patent Authorization for the $55.5 million Smart Security Project. Original file. The second, Grant Group Patent Use Addendum. Confidential version. The third, Plan B Activation Node Memo. Lucas carefully checked the seal on each document and confirmed none had been opened. Then he took out an ordinary craft paper file folder from the drawer, placed the 3 documents inside one by one, sealed it, put on a sticky note, and wrote neatly with a pen. Personal technical notes. The movements were smooth, as if he had done them 1,000 times. Finally, he looked around the office where he had spent 3 years. The quarterly performance chart hanging on the wall. The bronze innovation pioneer of the year trophy on the shelf. The pothose by the window, its leaves glossy. Vivian had bought it casually during a business trip, saying it was easy to keep alive and did not need much attention. Leave it all here. He picked up the cardboard box, grabbed the unremarkable craft folder, and pushed open the door. In the hallway, he ran into several subordinates. Their steps paused, their eyes dodged, and their lips opened and closed as if they wanted to speak but could not. Lucas nodded at them. He did not speak. He did not stop. As the elevator descended, he stared at the floor indicator. 27 seconds. Enough for a life to fall from the clouds into mud before even an echo could arrive. 6 o'clock in the evening. The living room of the villa. This house had been prepared by the Grant family as their marital home. 4,300 square feet, a top-floor duplex. The decor had been chosen personally by Vivian. Minimalist, with large blank spaces, cool gray walls, black metal lines, glass partitions, even matte fog-finish curtains. It was as clean as a model home. And as cold as a morgue. Lucas placed the signed divorce agreement in the center of the coffee table. The pages were flat, the handwriting clear, without a single correction mark. The clause waiving all marital property was one he had added himself. The Grant family's money, the Grant family's house, everything that belonged to the Grants. He did not want a penny. He took only a few changes of clothes, a laptop, and that craft folder. Before leaving, he stopped in the foyer and looked back once. The sunset came slanting through the floor-to-ceiling windows, dragging a long shadow across the polished marble floor. It looked lonely, like a paper cutout abandoned by the world. In 3 years, how many meals had they eaten in this living room? Counting on his fingers, fewer than 20. Most of the time, each of them worked late. Or he sat in the study waiting for her until his eyelids grew heavy, eventually falling asleep alone, only to wake and find her coat draped over the sofa while she was nowhere to be seen. So this marriage had long been an empty shell. Only he had still been pouring warmth into it. He had simply been unwilling to accept it, always thinking that if he warmed it a little longer, he could melt that layer of ice. His phone vibrated in his pocket. Lucas glanced at the caller ID. Vivian Grant. He answered but said nothing. Lucas' heart, what is this supposed to mean? Her voice was stretched tight like a string about to snap, carrying anger she could not suppress. You're using divorce to threaten me? You think this will make me take back the decision? Lucas looked at the darkening sky outside. The clouds hung low, like a heavy sheet of lead. I already signed, he said, his voice calm as a weather report. The agreement is on the coffee table in the living room. Real estate, savings, equity. I don't want any of it. From now on, you and I owe each other nothing. The other end went silent for 2 seconds. Long enough to hear the faint hiss of static. Then Vivian gave a short, sharp laugh, like glass scraping across a chalkboard. Fine. Very good. Lucas' heart, you chose this yourself. Don't regret it. I won't. He hung up, swiped his finger across the screen, blocked the number, and put the phone back into his pocket. The motion was clean, like removing an old pair of gloves. When he pushed open the heavy solid wood door, the early autumn evening wind poured in, carrying a cool dampness that disturbed a strand of hair on his forehead. He did not look back. He pulled the door shut behind him. Click. The lock catching sounded crisp and final. Like a full stop, cutting off everything that had come before. 11 o'clock that night. A luxury apartment in the south of the city. At some point, rain had begun to fall, fine and continuous, like a net woven without sound, wrapping the city gently. Lucas stood before the 23rd floor window and looked down at the bright night lights below. In the distance, the outline of Grant Group headquarters appeared and disappeared in the rain. Several windows on the top floor were still lit, like stubborn stars in the dark. Vivian was probably still working overtime. Or maybe she was celebrating today's victory with Mason Cole. Lucas turned and walked back to the desk. The lamplight spread softly. The core architecture and patent authorization for the $55.5 million smart security project lay quietly open on the desk. His fingers slowly traced the key clause 3 and stopped on one line. The patent owner, Lucas Hart, grants Grant Group a non-exclusive license for a term of 5 years. If Party B experiences a major personnel change, or if Party A voluntarily elects termination, Party A has the right to unilaterally revoke the authorization without incurring liability for breach. Major personnel change. For example, firing the core patent inventor. Lucas closed the file, picked up his phone, and dialed a number he had saved for a long time but had never truly called. It rang 3 times. Connected. "Uncle Thompson," Lucas said. "It's me." A long sigh came from the other end, like an echo rising from deep time. "Lucas, you've suffered. Things went exactly as we expected." Lucas walked to the window. The rainy city spread before his eyes like a floating sea of stars. "We can activate Plan B. You have the authorization documents?" "Yes. The original patent files are safe." Lucas paused. His voice sank like a tide covering rocks. "The project kickoff meeting is tomorrow at 9? "Yes. Vivian Grant is going to announce personally that Mason Cole will take full responsibility for the project." Director Thompson's voice lowered further. "She thinks firing you means she can hold the entire smart security division in her hand. She has no idea that the lifeline of this project was never in the company's hands." Lucas looked at his reflection in the glass. His eyes were sharp, like a blade just drawn from its sheath, with none of the restraint and testing from the boardroom that morning left in them. "Then let her announce it," he said. "Let's see how she cleans it up tomorrow." After hanging up, Lucas stood by the window for a long time. The rain grew heavier. Dense drops beat against the glass like countless tiny drumsticks, striking a rapid, resolute rhythm beside his ear. The lights of the company headquarters blurred through the rain, turning into warm yet distant halos. Suddenly, he remembered the day Vivian's father handed the company to her 3 years ago. The older man had held Lucas's hand and said, "Vivian has a temper, Lucas. Watch over her for me." He had once sincerely wanted to watch over her, protect her, and help her make the company better. But now, there was no need. Lucas raised his hand and turned off the desk lamp. The room instantly sank into darkness. Just as that ink-black dark swallowed everything, his phone screen lit up. A new text from an unknown number. "Mr. Hart, the financial records and related party transactions for Mason Cole over the past 3 years have been compiled. Ready to send any time." His thumb tapped lightly. One-word reply. "Send." The light of the screen went out abruptly, as if someone had choked it. Lucas set the phone gently on the corner of the desk. The metal shell tapped out a faint dull sound. He stood and walked toward the window. His steps were not heavy, but they carried a weighty rhythm. The rain had stopped. Even the final drop of water seemed too lazy to make a sound. The city at 4 in the morning was hollowly quiet and black to the bottom, like a piece of silk soaked over and over until it had absorbed enough ink to become heavy across heaven and earth. Only a few scattered lights still stubbornly burned, faint yet unyielding, like people refusing to close their eyes. He pulled open the curtains. Night wind rushed in at once, carrying the crispness and dampness unique to early autumn, brushing over his wrists and neck like a splash of cold water thrown over his head. His phone suddenly vibrated. Short and abrupt, like a stone dropped into a silent lake. He turned back to the desk and looked at the screen. A new email. The subject line was glaring. Mason Cole Related Party Transaction Records, 2019 to 2022. The attachment was terrifyingly large. He opened it. His fingertips slid across the screen, quick and steady, like he was reviewing old accounts he had long known by heart. The numbers were brutally cold. Over 3 years, 3 shell companies under Mason Cole's name had signed so-called technical service contracts with 3 suppliers under Grant Group. The total amount was $12.25 million. The contract terms were vague and cloudy. The service descriptions were so blurry they might as well have been written on frosted glass. The payment rhythm was absurdly abnormal. The moment one payment arrived, the next one came chasing after it like a debt collector. Even more glaring was the 15% kickback ratio. This was not a gray area. It was licking blood off the edge of a knife in broad daylight. And the most fatal line was this: 2 of those suppliers were listed as designated partners in the bidding documents for the $55.5 million smart security project. Lucas closed the email. He did not exit. He only pressed the back button and let the screen turn completely black. He stood and went to pour water. The glass filled, and the stream of water made a clear sound as it fell. The temperature was just right. Not hot enough to burn the hand, not cold enough to hurt the teeth, like a precisely controlled remnant of warmth. He took a sip. His Adam's apple moved. His gaze, however, had already passed over the rim of the glass and gone to the window. The edge of the sky was quietly turning blue-gray, like the first pale wash of ink spreading across rice paper. In the distance, the silver-gray glass curtain wall tower of Grant Group headquarters slowly took shape in the morning light. Its edges were sharp, its presence cold and solemn. It had once been the place he entered punctually at 7:30 every morning. Now it felt unfamiliar, as if behind a thick pane of frosted glass. Visible, but untouchable, and impossible to return to. His phone vibrated again. This time it was a text from Director Thompson, short words that pressed so heavily they made breathing difficult. Client technical team has arrived. Kickoff meeting begins at 9 o'clock sharp. Lucas's thumb hovered over the screen for half a second. He typed 2 words. Received. He set down the glass. The bottom touched the table with a soft sound. Then he turned and walked into the bathroom. The mirror reflected a face with faint shadows under the eyes and thin streaks of red in the whites. But those eyes were startlingly bright, awake to the point of sharpness. He turned on the faucet. With a rush, cold water poured down. He scooped up a handful and splashed it hard onto his face. The biting chill stabbed into his skin like needles, making his eyelids tremble, but it instantly cleared his entire mind. All the chaos, fatigue, and suppression were washed open by that ruthless cold. 7:50 a.m. The door to the temporary office opened. It was a co-working space hidden inside a startup park in the south of the city. Not large, but south-facing. Sunlight came slanting through the floor-to-ceiling windows and spread a warm gold strip across the pale wood tabletop. Everything was already prepared on the desk. A closed laptop. 3 neatly printed documents. And a cup of coffee, the latte art still intact, steam rising in thin curls. His assistant, Daniel Brooks, had prepared it. "Mr. Hart." Daniel stood by the desk. His voice was a little tight, his fingers unconsciously rubbing the cuff of his shirt. "On Ms. Grant's side. Will she really?" "She will." Lucas was already seated, lifting the laptop lid. The screen lit up, casting light across his jaw. "She will announce on the spot that Mason Cole is taking over the project. But Contract Exhibit 3. She didn't read it," Lucas interrupted, his tone flat, like he was saying the weather was fine today. Even if she had, she would have treated it as useless paper. Daniel moved his lips, but in the end, he said nothing. Lucas opened his email. His fingers flew across the keyboard. The glow of the screen flickered across his face, outlining a focused, cold profile, like a precision instrument in operation. 8:30 a.m. His phone rang. The caller ID showed 3 words. Vivian Grant. Lucas stared at the blinking name for a full 10 seconds. Then he lifted a hand and pressed mute. He gently turned the phone over, screen down, and set it on the desk. The vibration immediately traveled through the glass tabletop. Dull, continuous, stubborn, like a bird still struggling after its throat had been pinned. 30 seconds later, it stopped. 5 seconds after that, it rang again. This time, he did not even look. He swiped to reject the call. Daniel stood by the door, opened his mouth, then swallowed the words. "Ignore it," Lucas said without lifting his head, his fingers still moving across the keyboard. "Let her call." 9 o'clock sharp. The largest conference room at Grant Group headquarters. Both sides of the long table were full. On the left sat Grant Group executives, suits crisp, expressions varied. On the right sat representatives from Cloud9 Technologies, the client company. Every one of them wore dark shirts and neatly tied ties. The smell of freshly ground coffee drifted in the air. Papers rustled softly. It should have been the lively atmosphere of a grand opening meeting, but right now it felt as if someone had quietly drained the oxygen from the room, making everyone's chest feel heavy. Vivian sat at the head of the table in a royal blue suit with sharp tailoring that made her skin look even paler. She lifted her chin slightly, her gaze slowly sweeping the room before landing precisely on the middle-aged man seated first on the client side. "Director Walker," she said, the corners of her lips lifting into a flawless business smile, "thank you and Cloud9 Technologies for placing such importance on this partnership. I believe that with both sides working together." "Ms. Grant." Director Walker suddenly spoke, cutting her off. His brows drew together slightly. His tone revealed no emotion, but it carried a weight that allowed no doubt. Where is Mr. Lucas Hart? The conference room fell dead silent in an instant. Even the sound of the air conditioning seemed to be cut off. Vivian's smile stiffened for half a second, almost too fast to see, then relaxed again. Mr. Hart has another important matter today. But please rest assured, the project has been fully handed over to Secretary Cole. He has the same deep and comprehensive understanding of the entire technical framework. I'm sorry. Director Walker raised his hand, palm up, making a clear pause gesture. His voice suddenly sank. Contract Exhibit 3 is very clear. The core architecture of this project was personally built by Mr. Lucas Hart. All subsequent deep integration, customized development, and technical implementation must be performed by him personally, or by a core team authorized by him in writing. He paused, his gaze stabbing straight at Vivian like a nail. That is the premise of the partnership. It is not optional. Every gaze in the room fixed on Vivian's face. The air was so still she could hear her own heartbeat. Her ears heated slightly, and her fingers curled under the table. Behind and slightly to the side, Mason Cole quickly stood. His face carried exactly the right amount of concern. Director Walker, Mr. Hart is temporarily unable to attend, but I have fully mastered all technical documentation, interface protocols, and test cases. Secretary Cole. Director Walker lifted his hand again and stopped him. His tone was cold as frost. What we trust is Mr. Hart's technical ability, not a pile of files lying on a hard drive. Anyone can read material. But the people who can truly understand it, debug it, and handle sudden issues on the client site are Mr. Hart and his team. The color drained from Mason's face. Under the table, Vivian's fingernails dug deep into her palm. The fine pain became the only thing she could hold on to. Director Walker, she forced her voice to stay steady, even adding the right touch of apology. Mr. Hart truly has an urgent matter to handle. But project progress cannot wait. What if we proceed this way? Secretary Cole will lead the initial coordination, and I will immediately coordinate on my end to ensure Mr. Hart returns no later than tomorrow to follow the technical implementation throughout. No. Director Walker abruptly stood. The legs of his chair scraped across the marble floor with a sharp sound. Several suppressed gasps rose in the room. Ms. Grant, Director Walker said, his voice like a blade dipped in ice, every word perfectly clear, this is a $55 million project, not a $500,000 project. We chose your company because Lucas Hart's technical moat in smart security is a real industry benchmark. If we cannot see him personally today, or a core team authorized in writing by him, then this meeting has no reason to continue. After that, he looked behind him. His team understood at once. Their movements were perfectly uniform. Laptops closed. Folders gathered. Backpacks zipped. Vivian's heart clenched hard, as if gripped by an icy hand. Wait. The words escaped her, her voice tight. Director Walker, please give me 10 minutes. I'll contact Mr. Hart immediately. Director Walker was silent for 2 seconds, then sat back down. 10 minutes, he said. We'll wait. Vivian nearly slammed open the door to her office. The door banged shut behind her, cutting off all the prying, speculation, and silent pressure outside. She leaned against the cold door panel. Her chest rose and fell violently. Only after taking 3 deep breaths did she barely suppress the panic surging in her throat. Vivian, don't rush. Mason followed right in, quickly walked to the water dispenser, poured her a cup of warm water, and handed it over. Lucas is just holding a grudge and trying to scare you a little. He wouldn't really gamble with the project. That's $55 million. Without the company, without you, he's nothing. Vivian took the cup. Her fingertips were cold, but she did not drink. She quickly walked to the desk, clicked open the computer with slightly trembling fingers, and pulled up the electronic version of the project contract. The mouse wheel scrolled wildly. Pages flew by before finally stopping at Exhibit 3. Black words on white paper. Ironclad evidence. Key technical integration must be completed by patent holder Mr. Lucas Hart or by his core team authorized in writing. If Party B, Grant Group, unilaterally changes the integration lead, Party A, Cloud9 Technologies, has the right to immediately suspend all payments until this clause is fully satisfied. Below it was a bold line, like a red-hot brand. This clause is a foundational term of this partnership and is non-negotiable, non-waivable, and non-substitutable. Vivian stared at the screen. Darkness pulsed before her eyes. Where is legal? She abruptly looked up. Her voice shot higher, with a sharpness even she had not noticed. Call the general counsel in here immediately. 5 minutes later, the general counsel nearly ran into the office. Fine sweat covered his forehead, his tie was crooked, and the third button of his shirt had popped open. Ms. Grant, this clause. This clause was indeed something Mr. Hart insisted on adding at the time. His voice grew lower and lower until it almost sank into his collar. At the time, Cloudmind also signed it, explicitly stating that they recognized only Mr. Hart's technical endorsement. Why did no one remind me? Vivian's voice lashed out like a whip. The general counsel's shoulders shrank. Why yesterday, when you announced Mr. Hart's removal? I wanted to say something. But Secretary Cole said. He said these details could be consolidated later. Vivian suddenly turned her head. Her gaze pierced Mason like a knife. Mason's face turned deathly pale. He hurried to explain. Vivian, I really thought that no matter how angry Lucas was, he wouldn't use the entire project to vent. After all, this affects the company's annual performance. It affects your position. Shut up. Vivian cut him off. Her voice was as light as a feather, yet heavy enough to suffocate. She grabbed her phone. Her fingers were so tense they turned white. She quickly found Lucas's number and pressed call. Busy tone. She called again. Still busy. The third time, it rang 5 times, then was cleanly rejected. Vivian stared at the words call ended on the screen, and anger shot up to the top of her head. She pressed redial hard, her knuckles turning bluish-white from the force. This time, it rang 7 times. Finally, the call connected. Across the city, inside the temporary office, Lucas stood by the window with the phone against his ear. Outside was an unfamiliar street scene. Morning rush-hour traffic crawled slowly below, like a tired river with its bones removed. On the other end, Vivian's voice crashed down on him from the start, urgent, arrogant, and utterly entitled. Lucas Hart, what exactly are you trying to do? Why does that $55 million project have to be coordinated only by you? Are you sabotaging things behind the scenes to threaten me with the project? Come back now and hand over the authority. Not half a sentence of inquiry. Not a trace of negotiation. Only orders. Naked orders. Lucas was silent for 2 seconds. During those 2 seconds, countless images flashed through his mind. 3 years ago, at their wedding, she had smiled at him in a pure white dress, light in her eyes. In the study late at night, they sat side by side in front of the computer, a cold cup of coffee beside them, the lamp casting gentle light. And yesterday, in the conference room, when she read the removal resolution, the line of her profile had been hard and cold without a trace of warmth. Then he spoke. His voice was hoarse, yet like a thin blade just drawn from its sheath, cold light gleaming with every word. Ms. Grant. That title made the other end obviously pause. Yesterday, to clear space for Mason Cole, you personally fired the technical lead of the company. Lucas spoke slowly, each word hammered hard. The core technical architecture of this project is my patent, and it is a resource built from my private work and effort. Contract Exhibit 3 states it plainly. The patent holder has the right to designate the only legally authorized integration team. You. Vivian tried to cut in. Lucas did not give her the chance. Since you decided I was incompetent and that Mason Cole was more suitable to lead this project, he paused, his voice carrying no anger, only a tired certainty and complete business-like finality. Then I'll see you in court. I will formally terminate all patent authorizations related to this project. A short gasp came from the other end. Lucas Hart, are you insane? Vivian's voice shot up sharply, twisting out of shape. That is a $55 million project. If you revoke the authorization, the company will have to pay. How much it pays is for legal to calculate. Lucas calmly interrupted. My legal team will contact Grant Group's legal department this afternoon. As for Cloudmind Technologies. He paused for a second. Finally, a faint, cold sarcasm surfaced in his tone. You can try telling them that the secretary you personally promoted understands the technology better than the patent inventor. Then he hung up. Clean. Decisive. Without a single trace of hesitation. The phone screen went dark, reflecting his calm, unmoved face. Daniel stood by the door, holding the freshly printed documents. His expression was frozen, as if he had been struck motionless. Mr. Hart. Are you really? Really? Lucas turned back to the desk, opened a drawer, and took out a document he had prepared long ago. Prepare the patent authorization termination notice. Send it to Grant Group's legal department by 3 this afternoon. Copy CloudMind's general counsel. And CloudMind sighed. They'll come to me. Lucas sat down and reopened the computer. The screen light illuminated his eyes. And soon, in the hallway outside the Grant Group conference room, Vivian held the phone, her fingertips cold. The busy tone in the receiver came one after another. Beep, beep, beep. Like a cold, merciless countdown. Like mocking drum beats. She stood in place, unmoving, for a full 10 seconds. Sunlight streamed through the window at the end of the hallway, bright and dazzling, yet not a single trace of warmth reached her heart. Lucas's final sentence echoed repeatedly in her ears. You can try telling them that the secretary you chose understands the technology better than the patent inventor. Mason poked his head out of the conference room, his face full of concern. Vivian, Director Walker and his team. They're getting impatient. Vivian abruptly came back to herself. She took a deep breath, straightened her back, and put the phone into her suit pocket. Her nails dug deep crescent marks into her palm. Pain was the only support she could hold in that moment. She pushed open the conference room door. Every gaze gathered again. Director Walker sat in his seat, his fingers tapping the tabletop slowly and evenly. The rhythm was slow, but it carried a suffocating pressure. Ms. Grant, he said, his tone colder and harder than before. 10 minutes are up. Vivian walked to the head of the table but did not sit. Director Walker, she said, forcing her voice to sound steady, even adding a trace of sincerity, Mr. Hart truly has some urgent technical issues to deal with. But please believe me. The project schedule will not be delayed. Secretary Cole will take full responsibility for all integration matters, including Ms. Grant. Director Walker stood. Behind him, his team also rose in unison, their movements so orderly they looked rehearsed. We are busy. Director Walker picked up the folder on the table. His voice was hard as iron. When CloudMind chooses a partner, we value technical strength, contract integrity, and credibility. Since your company cannot even fulfill the most basic contractual terms, I believe we need to reevaluate whether this cooperation still has any value to continue. Wait. Vivian's voice finally strained, carrying a nearly undetectable tremor. Please give me a little more time. 24 hours. No, 12 hours. I will solve the technical integration issue. Director Walker looked at her. There was no movement in his eyes, like two bottomless old wells. 24 hours. He finally spoke, his tone like a verdict that could not be changed. By 9 tomorrow morning, if Mr. Hart himself, or a core team authorized by him in writing, has not appeared and issued a formal commitment letter confirming full responsibility for technical implementation. He paused. His gaze was sharp as a knife as he said each word clearly. Then we will formally trigger the contract suspension clause. With that, he turned and strode toward the door. His team followed close behind. Their leather shoes struck the polished floor in neat, cold, unquestionable beats. The conference room door opened, then closed. The moment the last person left, Vivian's legs went weak, and she fell heavily into the large leather chair. The enormous conference table was empty. Only she and Mason remained. Sunlight slanted through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a blinding, shaking reflection across the mirror-bright table, like a shattered mirror. Mason hurried over and reached out to support her. Vivian, don't worry too much. Lucas will definitely get out. Vivian said it softly. But it was like a block of ice falling to the floor. Mason's hand froze in midair. Vivian? I said, get out. Vivian lifted her head. Her eyes were bloodshot, but her gaze was colder than a lake frozen for 1,000 years. Let me be alone. Mason opened his mouth. In the end, he said nothing. He turned and quietly closed the door behind him. The conference room fell completely silent. Vivian leaned back in the chair and closed her eyes. The images from earlier flashed repeatedly through her mind. Director Walker's expressionless face. The neat movements of the team members packing up their files. And Lucas's voice through the phone, calm to the point of cruelty. See you in court. Revoke the authorization. She abruptly opened her eyes, grabbed the glass of water on the table to take a sip and calm herself, only to realize her hand was shaking badly. Water spilled out and soaked the white cuff of her shirt. The cold wetness against her skin made her shiver. Outside the window, traffic in the city continued as usual, noisy and ordinary. But in her world, something that had supported her for 3 full years was visibly collapsing inch by inch. Her phone vibrated. She looked down. A message from Mason. "Vivian, don't be upset. I'll find a way. I definitely won't let the project fall apart." Vivian stared at that line for a long time. Then she turned off the screen and placed the phone face down on the table. For the first time, she felt the faintest doubt about the promise in that message. Could Mason really find a way? Or from the beginning, had all that thoughtful concern, those perfectly timed suggestions, those confident assurances simply been a sugar-coated fog, slowly covering her eyes? The thought had only just appeared when she violently smothered it. No. Mason cared about her so much. He thought for her so much. How could he? She shook her head, as if trying to throw out every stray thought, then picked up the phone again. Her finger hovered over Lucas's number for a long time without pressing it. Her fingertip trembled above the screen, as if suspended by invisible thread. Outside, sunlight cut in diagonally, like a warm thin knife resting gently across the back of her hand. The light spot moved with the breeze slipping through the curtain gap, one jump at a time, as if counting down the little time she had left. 24 hours. Not a grace period. A countdown. With every second, the liquidated damages in the contract doubled in her mind, rolling like a snowball and pressing her temples until they throbbed. The conference room door opened a crack without a sound. Mason walked in with 2 cups of coffee, thin white steam rising from the rims. The worry on his face was calibrated exactly right. Not a fraction more, not a fraction less, like a micro-expression rehearsed 3 times in advance. "Vivian, I made you a hot Americano. It'll help." He set the cup gently by her hand. His voice was soft and steady, like he was comforting a frightened cat. Vivian lowered her eyes to the phone screen, black and glossy, reflecting her pale face. She slowly put the phone down. Her fingertips were cold. When she took the cup, the warm ceramic made her fingers shrink back. She took a sip. The bitterness burst on her tongue, strangely pressing down the metallic sweetness rising in her throat. The board. Mason sat across from her, leaning slightly forward. His tone was so light it was as if he feared disturbing something. "I've already explained it to several directors. I told them the technical integration is just temporarily stuck in a small section, and we'll sort it out today." A small section? Vivian lifted her eyes. Her voice was terribly hoarse, like sandpaper scraping old wood. "The client just sent an email saying they want to suspend cooperation. You call that a small section?" Mason immediately sat straighter. His shoulders tightened, and his eyes shone with startling intensity. "Vivian, trust me. Lucas Hart is doing this on purpose. He's withholding the core technology, leaving half the documents and deleting half, even giving us only pseudocode for the interface protocols. He's waiting for you to panic, waiting for you to lose control, waiting for you to turn around and beg him." He paused, lowering his voice until it became deeper. "But I've read all of it. Every meeting note, architecture diagram, testing log. I've gone through them line by line and marked them up. Those so-called irreplaceable designs of his are just old routines piled up by inertia." Vivian said nothing. She only stared at him quietly. Mason met her eyes. His Adam's apple moved. His pace quickened, as if he wanted to pour all his confidence into her ears in one breath. "I understand this project better than he does. From the first day it was launched, I sat beside him taking notes. I remember exactly how many times he frowned while drinking coffee, which version of the plan he deleted, which remark he struck out. He suddenly stopped, took a deep breath, and said each word clearly. "Vivian, let me go. I'm better than him." The air froze. Even the sound of the air conditioning felt choked. Vivian's fingers unconsciously rubbed the rim of the cup, circle after circle. Fatigue was not like a tide. It was like wet cement, inch by inch rising, filling her limbs and bones until even blinking became difficult. She thought of Director Walker's straight suit back as he turned to leave. She thought of the bolded unconditional suspension right in Section 3 on page 7 of the contract exhibit. She thought of Lucas's final line before hanging up, so calm it had carried no ripple. "See you in court." She needed a support. Even if it was just a dead branch, it had to hold her up long enough not to collapse. Are you sure? She asked. Her voice was as light as a feather hitting the ground. 100%. Mason moved half an inch forward. His eyes burned bright. Vivian, give me this chance. I won't embarrass you, and I won't let the company lose face. Vivian closed her eyes. When she opened them again, only a dry grayness remained. Fine, she said. The tail of the word floated lightly, yet it was like a red-hot piece of iron falling into cold water. Mason, it's on you. 2 o'clock this afternoon, Cloud9 Technologies. Be there on time. Tell me now if you need any resources. The corners of Mason's mouth lifted, and the smile spread from his eyes. Don't worry. 2 o'clock sharp. Cloud9 Technologies headquarters, 18th floor, Building B, Conference Room 3. The long table was like a cold dividing line. The client's 6-person technical team sat in a row on one side. Their dark suits were pressed without a wrinkle. Laptop screens glowed, folders lay open, and the edges of the papers were neat as if cut by blades. The air carried the faint sourness of coffee gone cold, along with an indescribable sense of professional detachment so proud it was almost arrogant. Mason pushed the door open with 2 engineers. The 2 engineers walked unsteadily, their shoulders unconsciously pulled inward, like intruders who had strayed into someone else's territory. Director Lee, sorry to keep you waiting. Mason held out his hand, his smile standard enough to go into a training manual. Liam Lee stood. His fingers touched Mason's palm for half a second before releasing. He did not even give a perfunctory curve of the mouth. Secretary Cole, please sit. We're short on time, so let's begin. The projector lit up. The first slide showed the project logo and a gold title, Strategic Partnership. Mason stood in place. His pace was steady, his voice bright, and he explained the market outlook, user growth curve, and 3-year investment plan smoothly. He even smiled and said, "We intend to build this module into an industry benchmark." Liam Lee listened quietly, his index finger tapping the table 1 beat at a time, precise as a metronome. For the first 10 minutes, no one interrupted him. But when the PowerPoint flipped to core technical architecture, Liam raised his hand, clean and decisive. Secretary Cole, we've heard enough of the macro overview. Today, we're only discussing 3 questions. Mason's smile did not change, but the muscle at the corner of his eye twitched. First. Liam opened a folder. The paper rustled. Your proposal mentions a dynamic heterogeneous encryption chain. Under 10,000 level concurrent load, how do you control latency? The contract specifies 50 milliseconds. Where is the algorithm optimization? Please be specific. The conference room instantly became so quiet they could hear the external air conditioning unit humming. Mason instinctively turned to the engineer beside him. The younger engineer's lips had barely moved when Mason pinned him in place with a sharp look. This. He cleared his throat. His voice tightened slightly. The overall architecture has gone through rigorous stress testing. The latency fully meets the standard. As for the specific implementation details. He paused. His Adam's apple moved. They belong to the core confidential material led by Mr. Hart and are still in our internal confidentiality process. Liam's brows twisted, as if someone had pinched them hard. Second question. His page turn stirred a small gust of air. For the quantum-resistant encryption module, which category of post-quantum cryptography are you using? Lattice-based? Code-based? Multivariate? Please provide a clear basis for the selection. Sweat began to bead on Mason's forehead. He frantically flipped through the printed notes in his hands. The pages rustled like a flock of startled birds beating their wings. We evaluated multiple paths comprehensively. His voice was dry. Ultimately, we will choose the solution best suited to the actual scenario. Which one is the best suited? Liam pressed, his speed doubling. It's the optimal solution. Mason was still smiling, but the smile had already frozen on his face, like a mask pasted in the wrong place. Third. Liam closed the folder. The metal clasp clicked sharply. For dynamic access by edge computing nodes, how much low-level code does the existing architecture require us to modify? Where is the compatibility test report? Mason went completely silent. His mouth opened like a fish pulled out of water, but not a single word came out. Sweat slid down his temple, spreading a small dark stain at the collar of his shirt. The fingers clutching the documents turned pale at the joints, and the paper edges curled under his grip. In the entire conference room, only his heavy breathing remained. At that moment, the door was pushed open gently. Vivian walked in. She had not planned to come. She had paced in her office for a full hour, scraping 3 shallow marks into the edge of the solid wood desk with her nails. Finally, she grabbed her bag and rushed downstairs so fast that even the driver froze before reacting. Now she wore the same dark gray suit from the morning. Her hair was perfectly in place, and her makeup was light but sharp. Her heels made no sound on the carpet. Only she knew that her palms were slick with cold sweat, so sticky she wanted to tear off her own skin. She sat in the observer's seat and nodded slightly to Liam. Liam returned the courtesy, but his gaze was like an ice pick. Cold and sharp. When Mason saw her, his eyes brightened suddenly, and his voice rose. "Ms. Grant is here. Director Lee, these technical details can be handled later. Secretary Cole." Liam cut him off, leaving no room for politeness. "Just answer, can you or can't you? If you can, give the solution. If you can't, give the reason." Mason's face went white. He looked to the engineers for help. The younger one finally could not hold back and blurted, "Director Lee, for the quantum module, our preliminary choice is a lattice-based NTRU scheme because..." "I'm asking Secretary Cole." Liam did not even lift his eyelids. His gaze remained fixed on Mason. Mason's Adam's apple moved violently up and down. His lips opened and closed several times before finally squeezing out a few broken syllables. He clutched the stack of papers so tightly his knuckles turned blue, and the pages trembled in his hands. Dead silence. Vivian sat there, feeling her face burn as if she had been slapped in public. She saw it too clearly. The bulging vein on Mason's forehead. The shrinking of his pupils when he avoided the question. The uncontrollable twitch of the little finger on his right hand. Every detail was like a red-hot needle stabbing into her eyes. This was the man she had traded Lucas' heart for. This was the final bet she had placed with all her trust. Secretary Cole. Liam closed the folder. His voice was like the first crack in ice. "If you can't even explain the basic parameters, today's meeting ends here." A young engineer wearing black-framed glasses could not help letting out a snort. "You can't even read the technical manual, and you dare come give the main presentation? Did you think we came here for story time?" His voice was not loud, but it scraped across the room like shards of glass over a blackboard. Liam shot him a stern look, but the words were already out and could not be taken back. Vivian's hands tightened on her knees. Her nails sank deep into her palms, and the sharp pain was the only reason she did not lose control on the spot. Mason completely lost his footing. "Director Lee, please listen to me." Mr. Hart left too suddenly. A lot of core documents were never fully handed over. "I'll coordinate immediately when I get back and give you a complete solution tonight. 24 hours. Liam stood. His gaze went past Mason and stabbed straight at Vivian. "Ms. Grant, this is the final notice. Within 24 hours, either Mr. Hart appears personally, or a team designated by him and truly capable of understanding the technology takes over. Otherwise, we will formally issue a termination notice and initiate a full claim for breach." He paused for 2 seconds. His voice sank like a block of lead hitting the ground. A $55 million contract cannot be muddled through by sending someone who can't even explain the terminology. After saying that, he led his team out. Their leather shoes struck the marble floor, neat, cold, one sound after another, like funeral bells landing on Vivian's heart. The car ride back to Grant Group was so silent they could hear each other breathe. Vivian leaned back against the seat with her eyes closed. Neon signs flashed past the window, casting flickering light and shadow over her eyelids. Every frame from the meeting replayed in her mind. The bead of sweat on Mason's forehead dripping onto the PowerPoint remote. The crisp click when Liam closed the folder. And that light sentence, weighing thousands of pounds. "He can't even read the manual." Her stomach churned. She clenched her back teeth to keep the acid from rising. "Vivian." Mason leaned closer, his voice urgent. "Don't believe them. They already colluded with Lucas Hart. They were acting for you. He just wants to force you to bow your head. He wants to watch you beg him to come back." Vivian did not open her eyes. "I swear to God I've been good to you." Mason spoke faster and faster, carrying the desperation of someone burning his last bridge. "Everything he left is a trap. There aren't even comments in the handover documents. The API list is incomplete. Vivian, you have to trust me. Enough. She spoke. Her voice was so hoarse it did not sound like her own. Mason instantly fell silent. Mason. Vivian still had her eyes closed, her lashes casting faint shadows beneath them. I'm very tired. Let me be quiet for a while. The car cabin fell back into vacuum-like silence. Mason opened his mouth, but in the end, he did not speak again. He turned to look out the window, his fingers unconsciously scraping the edge of the leather seat, leaving several faint nail marks. Vivian listened to her own slow breathing. Very light. But something in her chest was peeling away and shattering inch by inch along the cracks. Colluded? Suddenly, she remembered the way Lucas had packed his documents after yesterday's board meeting. He had arranged every paper document in order, tied them with a rubber band, and kept his back straight like a sword still in its sheath. At the time, she had been sitting at the end of the long table, watching him open the door and leave. When the door closed, his steps did not stop, and he did not look back. She remembered the background sound when he said "see you in court" on the phone, keyboard taps, crisp, stable, without the slightest hesitation. She remembered every 3 in the morning night over the past 3 years, when he argued with suppliers until both sides were red-faced over one line of code compatibility, then finally dragged the supplier's technical director to the company for on-site debugging. Would a man like that need to collude with a client to humiliate her? If he truly had the ability to conspire with the client, why had he silently packed up and left yesterday when she said effective immediately? Sunlight passed through the car window and landed on the back of her hand. That patch of light kept shaking, shaking until her eyes grew hot. What kind of person had she actually trusted? The car drove into the underground garage and stopped steadily. The driver reminded her softly, "Ms. Grant, we're here." Vivian opened her eyes. She did not look at Mason. She pushed open the car door, and her heels struck the concrete floor, crisp and lonely, one sound after another, like the knocking of some long-decided ending. Mason chased after her. "Vivian, You go back first," she said without turning. "I want to be alone for a while." The elevator doors slowly closed, completely cutting off Mason's hesitant face. The metal doors reflected her image. Perfect makeup. Sharp suit. Hair immaculate. Still the Ms. Grant who made the whole company hold its breath. Only she knew that beneath those reflected eyes, something was silently collapsing. The elevator rose. B2. B1. The numbers jumped like a heartbeat, and like a countdown. When the screen lit up with 18, she took out her phone, opened her contacts, and stopped on that name. Lucas Hart. This time, she did not hesitate. Her thumb fell and pressed the call button. A busy tone came through the receiver. 1, 2, 3. Then the call was cleanly rejected. The elevator doors opened with a ding. Vivian stood in the empty elevator, holding her phone and looking at the familiar corridor outside. Sunlight surged in from the floor-to-ceiling window at the end, turning the polished marble floor dazzlingly pale. So white it made people want to cry. Vivian stood in the elevator, her fingertips gripping the edge of her phone so tightly her knuckles turned white, as if they might crack at any moment. The endless busy tone rang in her ears, one sound after another. Hard. Hollow. Without warmth. Like a thin needle stabbing repeatedly into her eardrum. Like a silent mockery buzzing inside her mind. She stared at the screen. Lucas Hart lay quietly at the top of the call log, clear enough to hurt. For a few seconds, her brain went completely dead, blank as snow. She even forgot to breathe. Then a scalding burn exploded from the soles of her feet and rushed straight to the top of her head. The tips of her ears instantly burned numb. She had actually pressed that number. She had actually called him. And he had actually rejected her so cleanly. The elevator doors slowly closed before her. The metal gap narrowed little by little, like a silent, indifferent mouth. She did not move or raise a hand to block them. Just before the doors fully shut, the sensor beeped softly, and they opened again with a short, polite sound. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and slowly let it out, as if squeezing the suffocating weight from her chest. Finally, she stepped out. Her heel struck the mirror-bright marble floor, crisp and clean, echoing through the empty corridor like someone counting her heartbeat. Sunlight poured through the full wall of glass at the end of the hallway, so bright it dazzled, so bright it made her eyes ache, so bright she almost wanted to raise a hand to shield herself. But she did not. She straightened her back and walked step by step, as if walking a red carpet, and also as if walking to execution. She pushed open the office door. The secretary immediately sprang up from her station, her voice carrying a barely hidden tension. "Ms. Grant, Supervisor Zhang and the technology department are already waiting in the meeting room. They said you urgently summoned. Have them come to my office." Vivian cut her off. Her pace was not fast, but every word fell like an ice bead hitting the desk. "Now. But. Now." The secretary's throat tightened. She did not speak again. She lowered her head and dialed the internal line, her fingers trembling slightly. Vivian walked straight into the office and closed the door behind her. Click. The world was shut outside. The light was cut in half. Human voices, footsteps, and air currents all retreated into a blurry background. Only the low hum of the central air conditioning remained, like a tired bee circling overhead. She went behind the desk but did not sit. Instead, she placed both hands on the edge of the desk and leaned forward slightly, her gaze falling heavily on the desktop. Several files lay spread there. The project contract. Dense technical documents. The sternly worded meeting minutes just sent by the client. And a cup of coffee. It had gone completely cold. A thin layer of oily sheen floated on the surface, like a solidified sigh. She picked it up. The instant her fingertips touched the ceramic, a biting chill shot up through her nerves. She tilted her head back and took a sip. Bitter. So strong it was astringent. Like swallowing a handful of old ashes that scraped all the way down her throat, making her shiver and her shoulders tense. There was a knock. Light, but it felt like it had struck a drum. "Come in." The door opened, and 3 figures filed in. Supervisor Zhang came first. He was in his early 40s, his thinning hair revealing his scalp, a pair of thick glasses perched on his nose. Behind the lenses, his eyes darted away, not daring to meet hers. The 2 younger engineers followed. One clutched a notebook, the other a USB drive. Both lowered their eyes, chins nearly touching their chests. "Sit," Vivian said. The 3 stiffly moved to the sofa area and sat at the edge, their backs straight, like bamboo poles forced into soil. Vivian walked around the desk and slowly approached them. She did not sit. She stood there with both hands at her sides, sweeping her gaze from left to right before pinning it on Supervisor Zhang's face. "You understand the situation. The client gave us 24 hours. We are not discussing whether we can do it. We must produce a workable alternative solution." Supervisor Zhang's Adam's apple moved as if he had swallowed a rough stone. "Ms. Grant, Mr. Hart's architecture is an original closed-loop system. The patent barriers are extremely high. The core algorithm and encryption protocol are black-boxed. The source code is not open. The interfaces are incompatible. If we have to rebuild it, there simply isn't enough time." "Not enough?" Vivian's voice shot up, like glass scraping a blackboard. "Then I'll add people. Add money. Add time. Starting tonight, everyone stays on site. Bring in outside contractors immediately. White hat hackers, algorithm experts, reverse engineers. As long as they can be useful, I'll approve any amount." Before the words had fully landed, her palm struck the coffee table hard. The glass surface buzzed, making several pens jump. Why can Lucas Hart do something others can't? She stared at Supervisor Zhang, her gaze sharp as a knife, each word deliberate. "The technology department has more than 30 people, all drawing high salaries every day, and you can't even produce a backup plan? Are you here to retire or to freeload?" The blood drained from Supervisor Zhang's face. His lips moved several times, but in the end, no sound came out. The young engineer clutching the notebook suddenly lifted his head. His voice was not loud, but it was unusually clear. "Ms. Grant, this isn't about manpower. Mr. Hart's architecture was built over 5 years of iteration. The underlying algorithm alone has 17 publicly filed patents, all cross-protected. We can't even find the debugging entry point. How are we supposed to bypass it, copy it, or imitate it? Then crack it?" Vivian was decisive. "Find the top white hat hackers in the industry. Double their price. I'll talk to them myself." Another engineer muttered softly, "But that would be illegal." "Illegal?" Vivian suddenly laughed. The curve of her mouth was cold. "So if the project collapses, the client sues, there are only 3 digits left in the company account, and employees can't be paid. That isn't illegal? She paused. Her gaze swept across all three men, and her voice dropped lower, heavier. This project must be saved. At any cost. The air froze at once. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed strangled. Supervisor Zhang slowly removed his glasses, wiped the lenses with his sleeve, and when he put them back on, there was actually a hint of desperation in his eyes. Ms. Grant, do you know why Mr. Hart dares to be this firm? Vivian did not answer. She only looked at him quietly. Because the core patent for that architecture, Supervisor Zhang said word by word, like reading a verdict, has the name Lucas Hart in the applicant field. Not Grant Group. Not the Technology Center. Him personally. Vivian's fingers curled suddenly, nails biting into her palm. All the authorization we previously used for our products, Supervisor Zhang continued, was personally issued by him. The nature is free, non-exclusive, revocable. In other words, with one sentence, he can turn every device we have into a brick. He paused for 2 seconds before finishing the final sentence. And the clause states clearly in black and white, if the company experiences a major personnel change, the authorization terminates automatically. Vivian stood where she was, her chest rising and falling violently as if an invisible hand had clenched around her heart. Sunlight slanted in from outside, spreading a bright strip of light at her feet. In that light, countless specks of dust floated, spun, and drifted slowly, so quiet it was almost cruel, as if silently mocking her panic, her arrogance, her self-importance. Get out, she said. Her voice was very light, light as a feather landing. The three of them were as if pardoned. They almost sprang up and fled toward the door, not even daring to close it hard. They only nudged it lightly, then quickly pulled it shut. The moment the lock clicked, Vivian's knees went weak, and she collapsed into the wide leather sofa as if all her bones had been removed. She stared at the clear handprint on the glass coffee table. 5 fingers spread open, the edges still carrying a little moisture, like evidence of her loss of control. She looked at it for a long time. Long enough for her fingertips to go numb. Then she picked up the phone. Her fingers were so steady they did not seem to belong to the woman who had just slammed the table. She called the general counsel. Come to my office, she said. Bring every file related to Lucas Hart's patents. Now. Before dawn had fully broken, the city was still immersed in blue-gray fog. When the general counsel pushed open the door, his face was 3 shades darker than the sky outside. He clutched a swollen dark blue folder to his chest. Heavy bruised shadows hung under his eyes. Clearly, he had been up all night. Ms. Grant. His voice was dry and hoarse, like sandpaper rubbing together. I found it. Vivian sat behind the desk, both hands folded on the surface. Her posture was proper, her expression calm, like a finely polished jade sculpture. Only she knew her palms were covered in cold sweat, sticky enough to make her nauseous. Say it. The general counsel placed the folder carefully on the desk and opened the first page. It was a yellowing copy of a patent certificate, the edges curling slightly as if they had been rubbed many times. This is the invention patent under Lucas Hart's name, number US 2018 XXXXXXX. He pointed to the applicant field, his voice low. The filing date is March 2018, 6 months before you married him. Vivian's gaze landed inch by inch on that name. Lucas Hart. The ink was clear. The strokes neat. As if carved there. This patent is the bottom-level core algorithm of the smart security system. The general counsel turned to the next page and pulled out several attachments. According to the authorization agreement, Mr. Hart's license to the company is free, non-exclusive, and revocable. Meaning he can unilaterally revoke it at any time without any liability for breach. His Adam's apple moved. His voice lowered further. Most importantly, Section 7, Clause 3 of the agreement clearly states that once the company experiences a major personnel change, the authorization automatically expires. Vivian's fingers began to tremble uncontrollably. She forced herself to reach out and stiffly pinch up the patent certificate. The paper was very light, light as a feather. But in her hand, it weighed like a red-hot piece of iron. The worst-case scenario is. The general counsel swallowed. His voice tightened. If Mr. Hart formally sends a notice revoking authorization today, not only does this project have to stop immediately, but every delivered product, every new product line in development, and even technical parameters mentioned in external marketing materials may constitute infringement. He turned to another page. The paper rustled. And in our main contract with CloudMind, Exhibit 3 states clearly, the technical source must be legal, clean, and free of ownership disputes. Once the patent issue is exposed, they can absolutely claim fraudulent representation and demand treble damages. Treble. Vivian's mind flashed through the numbers. 55.5 million times 3. $166.5 million. Add in potential claims from already sold products, supply chain breach caused by production suspension, and the chain reaction from collapsing customer trust. Her chest tightened. Her breathing became short and shallow. Is there a way? She asked, her voice hoarse as if ground by gravel. Legally, is there any loophole? Even a tiny one? The general counsel slowly shook his head. No. The documents are complete, the clauses are clear, and the signatures are authentic. And. He paused. His voice became almost inaudible. Mr. Hart has already formally retained Sterling Shaw LLP. They are one of the top intellectual property firms in the country. If they send notice, it means the litigation preparation is already complete. Vivian closed her eyes. But what appeared before her was not darkness. It was a wild flashback of scene after scene. Lucas bent over the computer in the study late at night, blue screen light reflecting off his focused profile, his fingers tapping densely over the keyboard. He said lightly, the patent issue is solved. The client won't be able to hold us by the throat anymore, his tone casual as if talking about the weather. When she suggested transferring the patent into the company's name, he smiled and shook his head. Keeping it under my name gives us more flexibility. Think of it as insurance for the company. Insurance. So he had long placed the most valuable thing in his hands in front of her, while quietly tying it to the strongest rope. And she had treated that rope as a noose around her neck. She had mistaken the protector for an obstacle. Ms. Grant? The general counsel spoke cautiously. What should we do now? Vivian opened her eyes. Outside, daylight had fully brightened. Sunlight poured in, making it hard to keep her eyes open. She looked at that light, yet felt a chill seep from the cracks in her bones. You go out first, she said. Let me think. The general counsel seemed greatly relieved. He almost backed out of the room and gently closed the door. The soft click of the lock sounded like a sigh. Vivian collapsed into the chair like a body with all tendons removed. She stared at the ceiling, her mind as empty as a nest that had been cleaned out. After a long time, she slowly sat up and reached for the water glass at the corner of the desk. Her hand shook too badly. When the glass touched her lips, water spilled out and slid down her jaw, soaking the collar of her shirt. The cold sensation made her shiver hard, but it also cleared her muddled mind for an instant. She could not wait. She could not drag this out. She had to do something. She opened the computer and clicked into email. The cursor blinked in the blank message box like a death countdown. Dear members of the board, regarding the current technical issues facing the Smart Security project, the following explanation is provided. She typed the first line, then stopped. How could she explain it? Say she had personally fired Lucas Hart, causing the core patent to go to zero overnight and putting the company on the verge of astronomical damages and a full technical blockade? Say she had trusted Mason Cole, embarrassed herself publicly during the client's technical integration meeting, and made the client walk out? Say she. Vivian stared at the screen. The cursor kept blinking stubbornly. She deleted the entire paragraph. She typed again. The project is currently facing temporary technical difficulties, and we are actively coordinating resources to resolve them. Deleted again. Who was she fooling? Those old foxes on the board. Who among them was not sharp? As long as they casually checked the public USPTO database, the truth would be laid bare. By then, every word she wrote would become an iron nail hammered into her pillar of shame. She leaned back into the chair and closed her eyes. Those scenes she had ignored, taken for granted, even felt entitled to, suddenly surged like a tide. At their wedding 3 years ago, when he placed the ring on her finger, his left hand had trembled slightly, but he had held her fingertip steadily. On the day the company won its first $100 million order, the celebration banquet was noisy and lively, but under the table, he quietly held her hand, his palm warm. The night her father was critically ill in the hospital, he stayed awake outside the ward all night. The next morning, when she opened the ward door, she found 3 urgent purchase orders already stamped and ready on the table, along with every document she needed to sign. Those details had once been air to her. A given. Things Lucas Hart was supposed to do. Now they were like dull knives, cutting over and over at her heart. It hurt so much she could barely breathe. "Ms. Grant." The secretary's voice came from outside the door, carrying obvious panic. Vivian opened her eyes. "Come in." The door opened. The secretary held a Kraft courier envelope in her hand. Her face was pale, and her fingers were shaking. This is certified court delivery. It just arrived. They require your personal signature." Vivian's heart felt as if it were gripped hard by an icy hand, stopping for one beat. She took the envelope. It was very light. So light it seemed impossible. Yet its texture was cold, as if it had just been taken from a freezer. At the seal, the bright red court emblem was glaring, red as congealed blood. She tore it open. Inside lay 2 documents. The first was a legal demand letter. The letterhead of Sterling Shaw LLP looked stern, the language precise as a surgeon's knife. To Ms. Vivian Grant and the Board of Directors of Grant Group, in view of the patent authorization relationship between Mr. Lucas Hart, our client, and your company, which has automatically terminated due to your company's unilateral major personnel change, our client formally notified your company yesterday that all technical authorizations are revoked with immediate effect. She read word by word. Every legal term was like a thin needle stabbing into her eyeballs and piercing her temples. Upon receipt of this letter, your company shall immediately cease all infringing conduct, including but not limited to use of the patented technology in delivered products, embedding of the technology in projects under development, and disclosure of related technical parameters in external promotional materials. Otherwise, our client will file suit in accordance with law and seek all legal remedies, including but not limited to substantial economic damages, injunctive relief, and market sales bans. The second document was a court summons. Cause of action: breach of contract and patent infringement dispute. Defendant: Grant Group. Legal representative: Vivian Grant. Court date: 15 days later. Vivian's hands shook so badly she could barely hold the paper. She wanted to breathe deeply, but the air entering her lungs felt like swallowing broken glass, cutting painfully. The secretary was still standing at the door, her voice faint. "Ms. Grant, should I notify the legal department?" "No." Vivian spoke with a calmness that frightened even herself. "You can go out first." The door closed again. The office returned to silence. Vivian laid the 2 documents flat on the desk. Sunlight fell perfectly across the page, exposing the cold printed words in every detail. She stared at them for a long time. Then she slowly reached out, her fingertip gently landing on her own name on the summons. Vivian Grant. 3 words. Neat and clear. Like a seal stamped on a verdict. Beside those 3 words, on another document, was the name Lucas Hart. One in the plaintiff section. One in the defendant section. Suddenly, she laughed. The sound was very soft, very short, like a sigh and a sob at the same time. It echoed gently in the empty office, sadder than crying. The computer screen was still on. The unfinished email sat lonely in the drafting window. The cursor continued blinking, once after another, stubborn as if counting down. But she could not write a single word. Any explanation would be like sprinkling salt on a wound. Any defense would be like a clown dancing in a fire. She finally understood. From the moment she had said remove Lucas Hart at yesterday's board meeting, the ending had already been written. She had personally torn down the load-bearing wall of the company. She had personally driven away the man who had been crouched in the shadows, silently carrying the entire building. Now the wall had fallen. The building was shaking. She stood in the ruins, and even the right to shout help had been erased by her own hands. Vivian stood and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling window. Outside was a city that never grew tired. Traffic wove endlessly. Towers stood packed together. Billboards flashed without pause. In the distance, the luxury residential district where Lucas lived shone softly in the morning light, gentle yet distant, like another world. She remembered his calm voice on the phone last night, without a single ripple. "See you in court." So it had not been said in anger. He had already been standing there, waiting for her to walk toward him step by step. And she no longer had room to turn back. Her phone screen suddenly lit up. She looked down. A message from Mason. Vivian, don't worry too much. I contacted several top technical experts. They all said there's a way to solve it. Dinner tonight? We can talk it through. Vivian stared at the line for a long time. Then she turned off the screen and placed the phone gently face down on the desk. For the first time, she did not reply. The phone vibrated again on the desk, like a dying insect struggling uselessly against the glass surface. Vivian did not look. She remained standing by the window, her back straight, like a statue nailed in light. Sunlight slashed through the gaps of the blinds, burning her eye corners and heating her eyeballs, but that warmth could not reach even her fingertips. The cold was seeping from between her bones, carrying the taste of rust, pressing heavily on her lungs until every breath felt like swallowing broken glass. One thought grew louder and brighter in her mind, almost drowning out the roar of traffic outside. Go see Lucas Hart. Beg him to come back. But how could she open her mouth? What did she have as leverage? She could not even get through to his phone. It was not powered off. It was not busy. The system's cold voice said, "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." Like a dull club smashing into her temple. There came 3 knocks on the office door, urgent enough that it did not sound like the secretary's hand, more like someone striking it with a fist. "Ms. Grant." The secretary's voice came from outside, breathless, trembling at the end. "Director Thompson just notified us. Emergency board meeting, 10 o'clock, top floor conference room. All shareholders and senior executives received the email and text message." Vivian slowly turned around. Light surged from behind her, cutting a sharp division across her face. The left half was washed pale by sunlight. The right half sank into shadow. Like 2 faces split by a knife. "Agenda?" she asked. Her voice was so flat it carried not a single ripple, frightening even herself. Outside the door, there was a 2-second silence. Those 2 seconds felt like 2 minutes. They said, "Discussion of the cloud mine project crisis and the patent lawsuit response plan." The secretary paused, then lowered her voice even further. "But Director Thompson's assistant secretly told me just now. There's also an item added to the agenda, special financial matter explanation." Vivian stared at the door. The wood grain was clear, the paint faintly glossy, and the handle cold silver. She suddenly remembered yesterday afternoon. 2 young people from audit in suits had stood at her door, briefcases in hand, saying they needed to pull special executive expense approval records from the past 3 months. At the time, she had been staring at the last technical handover document submitted by Lucas's team. Without even lifting her head, she had casually signed. The scratch of the pen across paper, now that she thought back on it, sounded like a funeral bell. That $1.25 million bonus sat right inside those 3 months. Her stomach suddenly twisted, acid rushing up her throat. "I know," she said. "I'll be there on time." Footsteps hurried away outside the door, like a receding tide. Vivian returned to her desk and opened the bottom drawer. Inside lay a document, its edges already slightly curled. Application for special performance bonus to Executive Assistant Mason Cole. She had personally approved it 3 days ago. The handwriting was still fresh. $1,250,000. The reason field read. Outstanding performance during project transition period, assisted the CEO in stabilizing the team. She had signed it quickly then. Because Mason had been standing on her left, holding a warm Gojian red date tea in one hand, the other gently resting on the back of her chair, his voice soft as a whisper. "Vivian, I'll plan this money well. Once the storm passes, we'll get married, buy a house by the ocean, and raise a golden retriever." She had not let him finish. She only handed the pen back to him. Her fingertips brushed the back of his hand, cold as jade. Looking at that line now, every stroke twisted on the paper like tiny poisonous snakes, flicking their tongues and burrowing into her eyes. 10 o'clock sharp. Top floor conference room. Both sides of the long table were full. Shareholders wore crisp suits, their ties tight enough to redden their necks. Senior executives sat stiffly, fingers unconsciously picking at the edges of the table. The air was so heavy it could be wrung out, and even the sound of the air conditioning felt sharp. The moment Vivian pushed open the door, more than a dozen gazes nailed themselves onto her. Scrutiny. Suspicion. The glee of people waiting to watch a joke. And undisguised disgust. She sat at the head of the table. Before her lay a stack of documents. A copy of the court summons. The original legal demand letter. The project suspension notice. Black words on white paper, like verdicts silently pressing on her chest. Everyone's here. Director Thompson sat in the first seat to her left. He was in his 50s, his temples gray, but his eyes were sharp as knives, scraping painfully across her face. Let's begin. The meeting was restrained at first. The general counsel's voice was weak as he reported on the patent lawsuit. The opposing side has a complete evidence chain. We lack counter-evidence. Our probability of prevailing is below 5%. Estimated damages may exceed 9 figures. The project director's face was gray. His hands were folded over his knees, knuckles white. Without Mr. Hart's technical support, within 24 hours. We can't even build the basic testing environment. With every sentence, the temperature in the room dropped another degree. Vivian listened, her nails digging deep into her palm. The pain was sharp, but it became the only reality she could hold. So, she began, her voice clear enough to pierce the full room's dead silence. Our most urgent task now is to fight for a settlement window while stabilizing the client's emotions and avoiding chain breaches. Before that, a woman's voice, calm to the point of cruelty, cut her off. The head of audit stood. She was around 40, wearing gold-rimmed glasses. Behind them, her eyes were as cool as a scalpel. She did not look at Vivian. Instead, she slowly raised the neatly bound report in her hand toward everyone. I would like everyone to review the preliminary findings of an internal audit. Vivian's heart shrank suddenly, as if seized by an icy hand. The woman opened the report. Her voice was steady, every word like a nail. Upon review, on the afternoon of the same day Executive Vice President Lucas Hart was removed, a special performance bonus of $1.25 million was directly approved by Ms. Grant without review by the Compensation Committee and issued to the personal account of CEO Secretary Mason Cole. Dead silence. Even the hum of the air conditioning vanished. Everyone's gaze focused on Vivian's face like searchlights. This expenditure, the head of audit pushed up her glasses, their lenses reflecting cold light, had no corresponding performance evaluation standard, no third-party assessment basis, and occurred at a sensitive point of severe personnel upheaval. The procedure was seriously non-compliant, and the amount far exceeded the company's standard incentive cap. Bang! Director Thompson slammed his hand onto the table and stood. The solid wood tabletop shook so hard the pen holder jumped. Vivian Grant. He roared, blue veins bulging at his temple. The company has a $55 million project about to rot in our hands. The core technology is being used to sue us for infringement. And you turn around and throw more than $1 million at a little secretary? He grabbed the documents on the table and flung them hard across the surface. Pages scattered with a loud rustle. When Lucas Hart was here, how many impossible problems did he and his team chew through? Staying up all night writing code, sleeping in the lab, paying out of his own pocket to buy late-night food for employees. Did he ever take a single extra dollar bonus? Huh. The color drained from Vivian's face bit by bit. She wanted to explain, but her throat felt stuffed with wet cotton, and not a single word would come out. At that moment, the conference room door was pushed open from outside. Mason rushed in. He had clearly received the news too. His tie was crooked, but his face still held on to innocence. Director Thompson, there must be a misunderstanding here. That money was a reward Ms. Grant approved. I contributed to the project. What exactly did you contribute? Director Thompson sneered and gestured for the head of audit to continue. The next second, the projection screen lit up. Cash flows from 3 shell companies. Supplier kickbacks. Private account transfer paths. One line after another was laid out clearly. The final page showed Mason's emergency fund transfer from the previous night. Gasps swept through the conference room. Mason's face turned completely white. He instinctively looked at Vivian, as if grabbing for the last piece of driftwood. Vivian, say something. Didn't you also review those contracts? You were the one who asked me to take over the project. You were the one who said Lucas Hart was too controlling and had to be replaced. Shut up. Vivian finally spoke. Her voice was very light, but it shook badly. She looked at the man she had once blindly trusted and, for the first time, found him absurdly unfamiliar. So she had not lost to Lucas Hart's methods. She had lost to her own arrogance and blindness. Director Thompson stood. His voice was hard and cold. I propose that Vivian Grant be immediately suspended from her position as CEO, that a temporary management committee be established, that Mason Cole be handed over to legal and the police for investigation, and that the board authorize renewed negotiations with Mr. Lucas Hart regarding patent authorization and Project Rescue. The vote held almost no suspense. The moment the hands rose, Vivian sat at the head of the table as if watching the throne she had built with her own hands collapse into ruins. She did not object. Nor did she say another word for Mason. At 3 o'clock that afternoon, Lucas Hart appeared in the top-floor conference room. Black suit. White shirt. No tie. His expression was calm to the point of sharpness. Behind him were his legal team and core technical group. Everyone moved in step, like an army finally returned to formation. Vivian stood, and her eyes reddened instantly. She took half a step forward. Her voice was hoarse. "Lucas, I was wrong. The project, the company, the marriage. I can make all of it up to you. Come back, okay?" Lucas looked at her. Once, if she had so much as furrowed her brow, he would have softened. But now, only a quiet field of snow remained in his heart. "Ms. Grant," he said. "I'm here today to discuss business only." Those two words were like a knife, cutting off Vivian's final illusion. The negotiation took 40 minutes. Lucas agreed to take over the CloudMind project under the name of his new company. Grant Group would retain only a small share of channel revenue. All patent authorizations would be signed again, with fees tripled. Grant Group would voluntarily report Mason Cole's related party transactions to the police, recover the stolen funds, and assume the corresponding losses. Director Thompson signed on the spot. Legal stamped the documents. When CloudMind Technologies joined by video conference, Director Walker said only one sentence. "We recognize Mr. Hart." At that moment, Vivian finally understood. Lucas Hart had never been someone dependent on the Grant family. He had only once loved her, so he had been willing to stand behind her. She had treated that preference as a matter of course. Only when he withdrew it did she realize she could not hold on to anything. Half a month later, Mason Cole was placed under investigation for embezzlement and commercial bribery. Grant Group's stock fell for 3 consecutive days before barely stabilizing, but it completely lost control over the smart security division. Vivian resigned as CEO and kept only her seat as a director. She moved out of that cold marital home. Before leaving, she saw the divorce agreement on the coffee table. Lucas had already signed it long ago. Her late tears fell onto the paper, blurring a small dot of ink. Outside the county courthouse, the autumn wind was cold. Vivian clutched the divorce decree and finally asked in a low voice, "Is there really no possibility left for us?" Lucas placed the document into the inner pocket of his suit. His gaze was calm. "Vivian, when I married you 3 years ago, I really did want to spend my life with you. But you personally pushed me off the table, and you personally lifted someone else onto it. People can make mistakes, but not every mistake deserves forgiveness." Vivian's tears fell silently. She reached out, wanting to grab his sleeve, but stopped halfway. Because she knew she no longer had the right. Lucas turned and left. At the curb, a black business SUV waited quietly. The door opened, and Daniel smiled as he called out, "Mr. Hart, CloudMind is waiting for you at the celebration meeting." Lucas nodded. Before getting in, he looked back once. Vivian stood on the courthouse steps. The wind blew her carefully arranged hair into disarray, like it was scattering a dream that had arrived too late. Lucas did not stop again. The car door closed. City lights swept past the window inch by inch. A message from Director Walker popped up on his phone. "Mr. Hart, first stage payment has arrived. Congratulations on the official launch of your new company." Lucas looked at the screen, and at last, the corner of his lips lifted into a very faint smile. He had once thought that losing a marriage meant losing the whole world. Later, he understood that what truly belonged to him had never depended on anyone else's charity. The car drove into the night. Ahead, the high-rise buildings were bright with lights. Lucas Hart's new game had only just begun. 3 months later, Lucas's new company took first place at the annual Security Innovation Awards. Applause thundered through the hall. On stage, he said only one simple sentence. "Thank you to everyone who once underestimated me. You taught me that a real trump card must always stay in your own hand." The screen lit up. New contract amount, $180 million. The whole room erupted. Vivian sat in the very last row, watching him stand in the light from across the sea of people. Finally, she understood. Some people cannot be won back with regret after they are lost. She could only watch him climb higher and higher while she remained where she was. Tears struck her palm, but they could no longer bring back the man whose eyes had once been full of her. From then on, he never looked back. And he never bowed his head for anyone again. He walked toward a greater world. That's all for today's story. Remember to subscribe and leave a comment.